Good afternoon, everybody. Just bear with me. Just going to wait a couple of minutes just until I think we have a few more people hopefully joining us. I trust you can see my screen okay. Louise, can you give me a heads up?
Yes, we can. We can see it.
Thank you. So yeah, so we'll just wait a couple of minutes if that's all right, or just another minute. Okay. All right, is my recording started as well? I'm not quite sure.
Yes, it has, CT.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. Sorry. Thanks very much. Okay. Thanks for joining, everyone. You all know me. I'm Christina. I'm one of the consultants, or work closely with Sarah and Louise as well within TSM. We're going to be talking about requisitions today. So P2P requisitions and how that really fits in within the Proactis suite. It's part of if you're using Proactis and you're licensed for P2P, it will be part of your existing license. So we'll talk about how you would go about configuring requisitions anyway, if it was something you were interested in. If you do have any questions, if you could just pop them in the Q&A or in the chat, and we can come on to them at the end of the session. Or if you prefer to just send me your questions separately, then that's absolutely fine too. You can just email them over to me at any point. That will be fine. Okay, so I'm going to go through some slides today. We're going to just talk about requisitions and its capabilities. And then I'll show you some software. We'll dip into some software as well. All right. Okay. So we're going to talk about requisitions and what it's really been designed to do. One of the key areas that it's been designed to focus on, okay, which is centralized buying. We're going to go through the requisition process, so how you would raise requisitions, the key features, and how you would convert those requests to orders. We're going to talk about the requisition approval process as well, and the capabilities that approvers have in relation to approving requests, which can be slightly different to the rest of the system if you're familiar with the rest of Proactis. We're going to talk about the buyer process as well. So what the buyer's responsibilities are if you're using that element of the system. You don't have to have the buyer process. It can be streamlined and you can automate the whole process going from a requisition to an order without a buyer being involved. But I'll touch on what the buyer's tasks potentially can be. We'll also talk about funding requests. So as well as the requisition module being designed to request goods and services, it's been extended further. So if you want to raise a request for funding or for some CapEx spend or project spend, then you have the capability to do so. So we'll talk a bit about that. Also request forms. So we utilize it for raising supplier requests, or if I need a new item in the system, or I need a new GL code. So it gives you the capability to raise a request inside the application, which can then be sent off for approval, and you have a full audit trail. You can also use the data for integration, okay, which is quite key. We'll look at some software. We'll also talk about how you get started, and then if you've got any questions, as I mentioned, please feel free to put them in the chat, and we'll cover those off at the end of the session as well. Okay. So requisitioning, centralized buying, that's generally what it was designed to do. So the request
Christina, sorry,
yes.
Can I just let you know that your slides are not moving forward?
Are they not? Okay.
No.
Okay, hang on. Let's see if you can see this. Am I stuck on the home, on the main tile?
You're on the agenda
On the agenda.
on slide number 3.
Okay. Am I on centralised buying now?
No, and I think other people can only see the agenda on slide 1.
Okay, let me just unshare my screen. Just bear with me. Apologies for this, but I'm not quite sure what's happened here. Let's just share the whole screen. Let's just do it that way. So I trust you can see this now.
Yes.
Okay, so just to take you back, so we've just been through the topics that I'm going to cover, okay, but using the slides. And here we are. Thanks, Louise. Thanks for letting me know.
No problem.
Okay, so centralized buying. Okay, so traditionally the requisition module has been designed for users to log in and raise a request for something. So it's a request for goods or services. They don't need to know who the supplier is. They don't necessarily need to know the price of the item or the service. They just want to request something. So you're potentially opening up your system, opening up the requisition module to a wider user base. Okay, they don't necessarily need to be users who have got access to raise purchase orders or receipt goods or raise invoices. So users can log in, raise a request for something, anything. They can type in what they like. They don't have to code it up. It doesn't require coding. It doesn't require accounting elements to be completed. They don't need to be validated. It could potentially just be used for them to raise a request for something. That can then go off for approval. If you want an approval workflow at that stage, potentially their line manager may need to approve what they're asking for, not necessarily the amount of spend, but just what they're asking for. And then it can be routed onto a buyer, and the buyer's role traditionally is to source the items. Okay, so their responsibility is to go off and find what the user's asked for. So if it's already in stock or they've got the item, then they can potentially reject the requisition with some comments. You can have communication between the requester and the buyer, which is auditable, obviously. Or the buyer can source the items. They can convert the request to an order. And obviously they're responsible for getting the goods at the best price. Buyers can also consolidate requisitions. So requisitions from different users within different departments potentially can be consolidated into a single order. And that order can then go out to the individual supplier. You can have automatic consolidation if you want within your system. So if you have the system set up in a particular way, certain items can be defined to auto consolidate. You can set schedules in the background to say these items or these requests with containing these items will be consolidated at a given date and time. And that will run on a schedule, and that's potentially will remove the requirement for the buyer. Buyers don't always necessarily need to be involved. If you do have a request that contains a supplier and a price, then it's not necessary for a buyer to be involved in the process. When the orders are created, they can either belong to the buyer or the requester, and you can define that on the requisition template. So each template can be defined slightly differently depending on how you want to utilize the module. Okay, if orders belong to the buyer, then potentially they would be receipted by the buyer. So if you can imagine, users are logging in and they're raising requests for IT, goods and services. Someone wants a mouse, someone wants a new cable, or whatever it is, some ink cartridges. The IT buyer will be responsible for sourcing the goods, and then the order potentially will belong to them. So within the IT department, they're raising the purchase order. They're going to confirm when the goods or services have been receipted into the organisation. Doesn't have to work that way. Alternatively, the requester can register the receipt for the goods and services, and the order created can belong to the requester. They can be the owner of the order. Just depends how you want it configured, and it's very, very flexible. So it's not necessarily one type of configuration fits the whole business. different departments, different teams, different items, different types of spend can be configured very differently with the requisition module. Okay, so the requisition process, multiple templates may exist. So you can have different templates. You may have a requisition template for IT goods and services. You might have one for facilities. You may just have one single template across the board. You may have one for travel requests. So there's lots of different types of spend potentially that may go through the requisition process. You don't have to have the requisition process for all types of goods and services. Generally, it would be where you have buyers, where you have buyers sourcing the items and they're responsible for the orders. You can specify maximum costs. So as you're raising the requests, you have the ability to put a cap on the spend. The approver can also review that and edit the request and revise the cap that's been entered. Depending on how your buyers are configured, if they've got permissions, they can exceed the cap that's been defined or the maximum cost that's been defined. Otherwise, they can't. If they're sourcing the items, they have to stay within the budget defined by the requester or the approver. Okay, as I mentioned, it's not essential for the requester to code the requisition. Again, it's defined by the template that's set up. It's not necessary for the requester to define the supplier or confirm the supplier that the goods are going to be sourced from. That can be left to the buyer. Okay, and approval workflows. The requisition module has the capability to approve differently to the rest of the application if you wish. So you can use standard workflows that are already in existence within the application, either nominal-based approvals or template-based approvals. That's absolutely fine. But you can also build approval workflows based on the type of item, so item classification. So different types of items can be routed to different approvers, or based on the department. So if I'm in this department, my transactions go to a specific approver, or you can have a combination of those. So a combination of the type of item and the department that's requesting the goods or service. You can define a workflow on that basis, as well as obviously all the other types of workflows you can have within the application. The approval process, so approvers are notified in the same way as they would be if they were subscribed to receive other notifications. That doesn't change. They do, however, have the ability to edit the requisition line, depending on how you set the system up. Okay, they can amend the maximum cost, they can amend the goods or service requested, they can amend the maximum price, they can select a supplier, they can change the coding. Okay, they also have the ability to batch approve the requisitions. So depending on how you've got the requisition module set up, you can have it configured where you use document level approval, so the whole document gets approved, or you can have it configured to approve at line level. And if you're using line level, then you can literally, the approver can literally tick, 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 tick each requisition line and approve. As opposed to going into every individual line. So it's slightly different to the rest of the system, where you're not approving a whole document. You can just approve that request line that's gone through. But I'll show you that as when we come into the software. The buyer process. So the buyer, if the requisition already contains a supplier and a price, and it contains valid coding, the buyer can convert it to an order automatically. Okay, so they can consolidate immediately, the order can be created. Or if it contains all that information, the buyer doesn't need to get involved. You can literally set the items up or set the system up to say that it can automatically consolidate those items, which means that there's no buyer intervention at all. Okay, however, when the buyer does need to intervene and they are responsible for sourcing the items and confirming the suppliers, the prices, the coding, etc., they've got the ability to tap into the existing item catalogue and choose a specific item. They don't have to use the item that the requester used originally. they can use a different item from the search, or they can just copy the request line and update the information. The buyer will also have additional capabilities. They can have a conversation with the requester where the requester will get notified if the buyer's opened up communication, and they can respond. The buyer can source the items using punch out. So if you have got punch out defined, or punch out is something that you're considering within your application, I'm not going to demonstrate punch out today, but we can obviously set up another session. If there are additional sessions that you want me to cover off as part of this, or anything that I've mentioned, then please obviously put that in the chat or drop me an email. But the buyer can source the items using punch out, so they can go off to using punch out or using marketplace, and go off and source the items from their approved supplier, using the approved supplier's catalogue with the negotiated pricing. So those negotiated prices, they're already defined, they're already pre-configured, and the buyer can bring back that information from the punch out using punch out. Okay. The buyer can also request quotes from suppliers inside the P2P application. Inside the standard product, there's a utility where they can go off and request a quote. They can add the suppliers in that they want to request a quote from, as an attachment and some comments, and send that out. And then obviously the supplier will communicate back, and they can decide whether they want to, which supplier they want to proceed with to create the order. Or you can also integrate requisitions with the sourcing module. So obviously Proactis is modular based. It does have a link to source to contract. So you can tap into the sourcing elements within that module. So you can go out, you can create a new sourcing request or add to an existing sourcing request if one's there already. You can also create quick quotes or add to an existing quick quote directly from the requisition screen. So if you select the relevant option and you have integration within the sourcing modules, then it will go out and update. And then obviously that sourcing request or that quick quote will remain and wait to be reviewed. Once it's reviewed and approved, it will go out to the supplier. Okay, again, though I'm not going to show that, but if that's something that we want to see, we have demonstrated it in the past, so we will have a recording for quick quotes that we can send you. And if you're interested in that, then obviously please let me know. So just a bit more on consolidation and creating the order. So the buyer can consolidate requisitions for the same supplier or for the same delivery address or from the same requisition template into a single order. They don't have to consolidate at all if they don't want to. They can create individual orders from individual requisition lines, but they do have the capability to consolidate. Okay. Obviously, you want to reduce your footprint, so creating single orders is beneficial to your organisation, but you have the options to do both. The buyer can also create draft orders. So where they're converting the requisition to an order, it doesn't have to become a formal order at that stage. It can become a draft order. And a draft order will allow the buyer to add additional lines to the order, for example, delivery charges. If they know that there's an additional cost associated to it, they have the opportunity to add that line in and then create the order. Now, the order can then go off for further approval. Once the sourcing information has been provided, the costs are known, that may need to go off for further approval at the order stage. Okay. And again, the buyer can be the owner of the order, or the requester can be the owner of the order, depending on how your templates are configured. So you've got lots of flexibility there. So that was what the requisition module is traditionally designed to do. So it gives you the ability to raise requests for goods and services that are then sourced from your buying teams. Okay, however, it extends much further than that. Okay, you have the ability to use funding requests now. So funding requests, they're a different type of requisition template that are created. It allows you the ability to raise a request within the system that doesn't then need to become an order. It doesn't need to be invoiced. It's a request or a funding request for CapEx spend or project spend or a type of spend potentially, and extends further. So as you raise your funding request, you might raise a funding request for, I don't know, let's say we want to refurbish our whole building. Okay, it's going to cost us £100,000. We want to raise a funding request to get the project spend approved. Okay, so we're not going out to a specific supplier, we're just getting the funding approved. So we raise our funding request within the application. That can go off via an approval workflow that you've configured, attaching the relevant documents and supporting information for your approvers. Once that funding request is fully approved, it can then create the project code associated to that request automatically within your finance system. So the integration can fire off and create the project code that you will link all subsequent spend to for that project. Okay, it doesn't have to be a project code, it could be a cost center, it could be whatever else, however you want to analyze your information, but the capabilities are there. So that original funding request doesn't become an order, it doesn't become an invoice, but it's available for you to have approved, for the project to then be created within your finance system. Any subsequent call-offs, and it has the capability, there's additional functionality within funding requests that allows you to raise call-offs against that original request. So the call-offs are requisitions. They are linked to a specific supplier and will have pricing information on them, and they will also be converted to an order and then be invoiced. But they will all automatically be stamped with that project code that you've had created as part of that original funding request. So it allows you to track the spend. You can have validation messages and warning messages to tell you when your spend has been exceeded or is going to be exceeded as well. Okay, so it's a really lovely feature. It's very powerful, but it's very simple to configure. Okay. And we also have request forms. So again, utilising the funding request feature where we've got the ability to have forms within the system that don't then get converted to orders and need invoices. We're using that request function to build forms where we can capture information and use it in the integration. So a lot of you are familiar with the supplier request form. So, you know, you can create a template inside Proactis, inside the requisition module, where we can define all the fields necessary to create a new supplier or a new customer within your finance system. So that can go off for approval. Those fields are captured. We can have lookup fields. We can have validation on fields. It can check, you know, supplier names or organization names and postcodes to see if they're duplicates. It can validate company registration information to see if they're already in existence in the finance system. So we've got lots of validation capabilities there. But those forms can go off for approval. Again, the full audit trail is contained within Proactis. And once they're approved, the data is created in your finance system and then flows back into Proactis, and that supplier or customer is then available for use for the users to create an order against them. Okay, we can also have amendment forms. So, you know, the forms can extend to amendments. You can amend suppliers or customers. You can use them to close suppliers or customers. You can have new item requests. So if you need a new item within the system, obviously we can create all the fields necessary for your item to be created. Once it's been fully approved, it'll automatically create it for you. So you don't need to go into item maintenance to create it. Or a new staff member, or a GL code or cost center. I mean, it's not limited. And obviously, because we've got the integration, we can take that data and we can post it to any third-party application. Okay. So I'm going to take you into Proactis now. I'm just going to stop sharing for a moment and then share the right screen. Just bear with me. So I know I've got a bit of an issue with sharing today and what you can see. Just bear with me. Okay, I trust you can see that okay, Louise?
Yeah, we can.
Yeah, fantastic, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to log into Proactis as my requester, and I'm just going to take you through some of the areas that I've talked about in the slides. Now, you will have a copy of the slides and you will have a copy of the recording, and I'll let you know how you can access those at the end of the session as well. So I'm going to log in as my requester. Okay. So it's a screen that you will be very familiar with. It looks a lot like the order screen, you know, staying in line with the rest of the functionality of Proactis. It has very similar features. So obviously you've got the ability to copy requests, cancel requests, view requisitions. You've got your search criteria and look at transactions that are in process or in progress. Okay. If I want to raise a new request, I can browse to my relevant template. So I've got various requisition templates created for me, and I'm going to go into my facilities request. Now, you can use other methods to create your requisition. You're not limited to using the requisition screen. You can use the multi-source search facility. You can search for the item, and it will identify if you've got it linked to a requisition template and allow you to create the request that way as well. But the important thing is a request can be anything. You know, you can link, I don't know, staples on a same request where you're, I'm going to put a price in there, where you're adding IT equipment. You know, I'm just an end user. I'm an end user and I want to request things. Doesn't mean I'm necessarily going to get them, but, you know, I have the capability to request all different types of items. So I may know the price, I may not know the price. Okay, depending on how your templates are configured will determine what you need to complete here. I do have a maximum cost here. I'm not going to enter it, but I can enter it. And again, if the buyer is restricted from exceeding the maximum cost, then obviously they won't be able to source the items for a greater value. And again, the descriptions that are entered here won't necessarily be the descriptions that are on the purchase order that's created. If you've got buyers intervening and sourcing the items, then they're going to be responsible for making sure that the order that's created is appropriate and can go out to the supplier. So obviously I'm entering, I need a new phone. The supplier's not going to want to see that. At the point when they're sourcing and they're converting the requisition to an order, they would need to make sure that the descriptions are appropriate. Okay. If I just expand the line, I do have the capability to add suppliers in if I need to. I don't have to, but I can if I want to. As you're consolidating and creating requisitions and converting them to orders, if you've got request lines with different suppliers on them, then obviously you're not going to be able to consolidate those to a single order. An order will consist of one supplier's lines. Okay, but if I just validate my request, I think I need a project code in here. Okay, so it should be very familiar to what you're used to. Again, you can add attachments, just toggle the screen and attach documents that might be relevant for the buyer. But when I'm comfortable, I can just submit my request. And that will go off for approval if you have an approval workflow configured. So if I just navigate and look at today's requisitions, there are some that I processed earlier that have gone off for approval. So again, your approval workflow, as I mentioned, can be based on what you have currently. So if you're using nominal based approval, so it looks at the coding on the transaction line, then it can be routed to the relevant cost code for approval. Okay, or you can send transactions for approval based on the type of item or the department, and the department being the department at the bottom of the screen that you have access to when you log in. So I'm in facilities and admin, potentially my transaction may go there for approval. Now, where I've entered these transactions and I haven't if I haven't provided coding information, if I've defined my requisition system up so that it doesn't require me to provide coding when I submit the request, then you can't tap into nominal based approval for obvious reasons. Okay, if you don't have the codes, it can't send it off to the relevant approver. So if it's something you're thinking about, just be mindful of that. Okay. I'm just going to log in as an approver. Let me just have a look. There are some that I raised earlier. So some caretaker, repairs to doors, some flowers, again, completely different types of items, but they can all be on one requisition template if you need them to be. Okay, and these have been routed to the finance manager, so I'm just going to log in and get those approved. Again, you don't have to have approval workflows at this stage. Some organisations would typically have the user's line manager defined to approve. Not approving the spend, because as I said, we don't necessarily know what the spend is going to be at this stage because the items haven't been sourced. So it can just be, yes, you can have this item, you know, and then the buyer can go off and confirm the prices. And then additional approval workflow may need to take place at the order stage. But again, it's entirely configurable and every organisation is very different. I'm going to navigate to my tasks. I've got my requisition items awaiting authorisation. And I can use a traditional method and drill down into each request and approve it, authorise or authorise with comments. And you can see that the approver does have the capability to edit the requisition lines. So if I want to put a maximum cost on here, I can. If I want to define the supplier, I can. The approver may say, yeah, we are buying it from this organisation. Which will guide the buyer, obviously. Let's just authorise that. But I don't have to. I do have the capability to just tick, 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 depending on how you've configured the system, obviously. Not all organisations want the approvers to be able to approve in this way, because obviously they prefer them to draw down and view the information in detail. But as I said, it's flexible and you do have those capabilities. So I'm just going to authorise the selected lines, and that's that. Okay, so that's the approval process and the capabilities of the approver. Obviously, you've got your columns and your filters, and you can, you know, export your results to Excel if you choose to as well. And I'm going to log in as my buyer. So I haven't configured any automation within this demo, but you do have the capability to go directly from a request. If your item has got a supplier associated to it, it has a valid price, the coding has also been provided, then you can go directly from the requisition or once it's approved, and the order can be created automatically. So you don't have to have buyer intervention. I have got buyer intervention. If you do have buyer intervention, you can then determine how much buyer intervention. So the buyer can then drill down into their notifications. Okay, and they can see all the items that require sourcing. And there are different ways of creating the order and sourcing the items. And I'll go through those with you. Okay. So if you have just standard P2P, standard Proactis, so you don't have any of the other modules, the sourcing modules or source to contract modules, and you're just going out to find a price and coming back with it and then creating your order, then what you can do is you can drill down into your requisition line, and this shows what the requester has asked for. Okay, so they've asked for staples. Okay. I have the ability to just copy my line, copy the request line directly to my draft PO. So what I'm doing here is I'm always creating my draft purchase order. I can copy my requisition line. I can change the price if I need to. Obviously, there's a maximum cost. I can change the supplier. I can add comments. I can change the description. So I might have an item code that I want to put in, you know, or additional descriptions. I've got the capability to do that before the order's created. I might want to change the coding. Again, I can do that here, or add additional attachments. When I'm comfortable with this, I can store my line, and I can either submit it into a consolidation stack. So it basically is a draft, but it stays there. It doesn't become an order yet. And when I've got enough items that are in my stack, I can then consolidate them all to a single order if the suppliers are the same. Okay. Otherwise, I can convert this directly to an order straight away. If I just submit the item for immediate consolidation, it will try and create the order. Okay, so the buyer can intervene. You can turn things on and off. You don't have to have as much manual intervention that I've got here. But as I said, I'm just showing you all the capabilities that you do have available. Okay, I'm going to go into my envelopes. Again, I'm going to use standard Proactis functionality. You don't just have to copy the item. You can use the search facility to add an item from the catalogue that you have access to. It doesn't have to be the same catalogue that the requester has access to when they're raising the request. The buyers can have a different set of items if you want them to. Okay, the requisitioner may just have one single line that says, please enter what you're on. That may be all they need to do. Whereas the buyer has a full catalogue of items. So you have that capability as well. The buyer can go off and request quotes. So internally within P2P, without using additional modules, you can go off and create a new request for quotes. You can identify the suppliers you want the quotes to come from. You can have multiple suppliers in that list as well. There's no email address on that one. You can enter your request details. Okay, and you can click save and you can send the request out. So it will send that out to the supplier automatically, obviously, if they have a valid email address, which I don't have here. Okay, so you can actually request quotes directly from within the application if you want to, and start communication with the supplier. And then obviously this will remain in here. Once you've got your response, you can decide whether you want to source those items from this particular supplier. Now, we are obviously working with approved suppliers that have already been onboarded and already been vetted, and suppliers that you may also already have a contract with, and negotiated pricing, ideally. Okay. You do also have the option to punch out. Now, I'm not going to do it because I'm not linked to my punch out website at the moment, but you can punch out. If you have a stationery supplier, for example, that you are buying from, and you've got punch out, or you've got marketplace where you've got multiple suppliers that you've got contracts with negotiated pricing that you buy from, then you can utilize this feature. It will take you out to that supplier's website or whatever site has been made available with those items and the prices, and you can bring those items back in to your request onto your order and create your order using that method. So you do have those capabilities. I'm just going to copy this one. I'm going to search for my supplier. Okay, and I'm going to make sure I've got price, unit cost, let's just say there, pounds, and store the item, and I'm going to submit item. Okay, you do also have the option, let's get rid of that little menu option, where have I gone, buyer. Just back in. So as well as using the standard features within Proactis, obviously we've got punch out as well, which is not standard. You do also have the capability of going out to your sourcing to source the items externally from within P2P. So if you do have the sourcing modules, then what you can do is you can select the items and you can select your sourcing option. And at this point, you can decide whether you want to add items from You can either use quick quotes or sourcing a request. You can have an existing request or add items to an existing request, I should say. So you may already have requested prices from a particular supplier within your sourcing module. Okay, you may already have an existing request with them. Now you may want to add additional items to that request or the quick quote. Now, when you do this, it will go off into your supplier relationship management module where it's reviewed under the various menu option, whether it's sourcing or quick quotes. They are draft at that stage. You will need to click OK or get them approved. There will be a process that they go through. Once they're approved, the supplier is then notified via the portal that they've got requests to respond to. Okay, but those are additional modules. And again, you know, we have run some webinars on those. So if you want copies of those webinars, we can make them available to you after the session. That's both on sourcing and on quick quotes. Okay, but I'm not going to do that now. I'm just going to use the standard methods available to me. So if I want to submit my item for immediate consolidation, so it doesn't end up in the stack where I can consolidate lines, again, I can just copy my line down, I can store my item, and I can submit for immediate consolidation. And that's removed it from the screen. So the buyer's only left with the tasks they need to deal with. Okay. So once they've dealt with those requests or those draft request lines, you've got the items waiting order consolidation. So I've got my envelopes in here. So I've got options. I can return it to the buyer if I want to. I can change the status. I don't have to consolidate immediately if I don't want to. I can set up again. I've got schedules. I've got options available. Or I can just click consolidate. Now, again, these options can be automated. You don't have to go through as many stages as I'm showing you today. So just be mindful of that. But I am taking you through all the various steps. And that has created a draft order or an order. The order number is successful. It's created an internal order. I've got drill down capabilities, and the order belongs to the requisitioner. It doesn't belong to the buyer. In this instance, I've set the system up so the requester has ownership of the orders. So I'll go back in as the requester in a minute and I'll show you what they can see. The buyer's created the order, but the requester is the owner. Anybody who goes into the purchase order will have full drill down capabilities back to the requisition. So what I'm seeing here is the draft PO. Okay, it is not gone for approval. There's no approval at the moment. Okay, but if I'm viewing the order, or anybody that's viewing the order, it's not yet authorized, they do have the capability to expand the line and drill back into the requisition. So again, there are full drill down capabilities. And you can view the original request as well. I'm just going to go back to my buyer screen. I've got 4 unconfirmed consolidated orders awaiting buyer. So I've got, these are my draft orders. So if you also have another stage. So as you convert your requisitions to an order, you can convert them as a draft order. I mentioned it in the slides. So you have the ability to add additional lines if you need to. So if you needed to add a delivery cost to the order, then potentially this is your opportunity to do it. If you want the requisitions converted to orders and for them to remain intact with no intervention and no changes, then you wouldn't hold them as unconfirmed orders. You would just turn that option off. Okay, but I can do that here. And if I don't want to add anything to it, I don't have to, but I can just submit my order. Again, I've got 3 left. I'm just going to go in and do another one. Okay. If I navigate and look at orders as the buyer and just look at my today's orders, there are none because those orders don't belong to me. Okay. If I log back in as my requester, who raised the requisitions originally. I've got the ability to go into my requisitions that I created today. Envelopes, let's have a look at that one. It says it's ordered, the status is ordered. And if I expand the line, I will have a link to the purchase order. So whoever you are within the system, whether you're the buyer drilling back to view the request or an approver drilling back to view the requisition, you can do that. If you're the requisitioner, you've got the ability to drill forwards and view the PO that's been created. And you can see the requisition that was created with 3 different lines, completely different lines. You can see they're at completely different statuses, which is another benefit of the requisition module. You're not dealing with a document as a whole, you're dealing with requisition lines, and they can all be doing different things. Okay. And as that one's ordered, I can drill into it and see the information. If I navigate to the orders module, if I've got permissions, obviously, again, you don't need to grant access to your requisitioners to the orders module if they're not going to be the owners of the order, but they will still have drill down capabilities. I can look at my today's orders and I can see my envelopes that I ordered, and I can drill back to the requisition. Okay, so we've been through, we've had a look at the requisition, the traditional requisition process. So requesting goods and services and having what we would like to call a centralized buying team who are responsible for sourcing the items. There are various methods of how you can source, whether you source them manually or you go out using your sourcing module and add them to sourcing requests or create new sourcing requests or quotes. But then obviously the buyer will convert and create the orders, and then you can control who has responsibility of those orders moving forward. So I mentioned the requisition module extends further than just raising requests for goods and services. We do also have the funding request option. So I'm going to just go through an open funding request, one that I created already previously, rather than create a new one. But it will just be, again, just done on a template. So you would go in and raise a request for your funding. It will go off for approval. So I've got here replacement servers, £20,000. And that requisition is now open for call-offs. That's the status of it. You can see as I hover, it's highlighted. So that funding has been approved. My project code potentially will have been created automatically within my finance system. So any subsequent call-offs will be stamped with that project code. So when you're reporting, you can report specifically on that project spend. Okay, now there's no supplier identified on this one, on this funding request, because it doesn't belong to a supplier. It's just getting the approval for the initial spend or the project, and then you can create call-offs. Okay, call-offs will be your normal requisitions and they'll follow the same process that we've been through already today. Once you raise your call-offs, you can view your call-off summary. So as you raise your requests, they'll be listed on this screen and they'll be offset against your funding request total. As your funding request total diminishes, you can have validation messages to warn you that you're going to overspend on that project. Okay, so that's funding requests. You also have the capabilities of using forms. So supplier request forms is a very popular form that we have inside Proactis. We capture the information that's necessary to create a new supplier. So somebody wants to raise an order, but the supplier doesn't exist on the system. They're not a finance user. They don't have the capabilities to go into the finance system to create them. They also don't have the capabilities to approve or identify whether the supplier meets your organisation's policies. So they can just go in and raise a request. I want to request to spend from this supplier. Okay, we can create as many fields as necessary to create the supplier in your finance system or in any other application. We can create additional fields as well. We can put validation on those fields. We can put approval workflows on these fields. It can validate the company registration numbers to see if there are duplicates. It can validate the address and the postcode to see if it's a duplicate, or the name and the postcode to see if it's a duplicate. So we have all these capabilities as well. Even if you're using the portal and you're using, oh my goodness, my mind's gone blank, supplier relationship management, that doesn't necessarily need to be your front end. You can potentially have this form where users are able to go in and still request a supplier, and this potentially can be integrated into your supplier relationship management tool, whether it's Proactis or any other third-party application. It's not limited to just Proactis. Okay, we use the data, we can utilize the data, and with integration, we can pull out the relevant information and have it available to be pulled into another system. Okay, but the nice thing about it is it goes through an approval workflow, and it has all the validation, and there's a full audit trail, so you know who requested the supplier, when it was approved, when it was integrated. Okay, once it's created within the finance system, integration will come back and update the form with the relevant supplier code, so you'll be able to trace that back through the system as well. Okay. But it's not limited to just supplier requests. Obviously, you can request a new item, or if you've got a new staff member, you might want to put the information in through Proactis and then have it integrated to a HR system potentially. It's not limited. Okay. So that's the end of my software demonstration today. I'm just going to stop sharing for a moment and then just reshare my slides, if you just bear with me. In fact, I'm just trying to share the right screen. Sorry, apologies for this. It's not behaving as well as I would have liked it to behave today, but we all have these problems sometimes. Okay. So I'm just going to have a look through if there are any questions, or if you've got any questions, anything you want to ask, then obviously feel free to just put some information in the chat. I'm happy to answer any questions on this session, or if you would prefer to just message me directly, that's absolutely fine. If you wanted to consider introducing requisitions into your system, which we're finding that a lot of organisations are actually looking to do that. I found that maybe 15 years ago it was very popular and then seemed to not be, but it seems to be again. So yeah, if it's something you're interested in, obviously please reach out. If you are licensed for P2P, as I mentioned, then you will already have the requisition module as part of your license. It's just a matter of us running a design session or a scoping session to identify how you want it configured. There'll be an element of consultancy. Obviously, everything is applied to test before it gets copied into live. And there'll be some integration, potentially, if you want integration, depending on what you want it to do. There doesn't necessarily have to be if you're not using funding requests or supplier requests. If you're using it traditionally just for requisitions, then it's just a case of creating your templates and your approval workflows and making sure your system is configured to work in the way that you need it to. But you can also reach out to Sarah and Louise if you would prefer to. That's absolutely fine. We are going to put a copy of the recording or a link to the recording in this chat. So Bruno will be updating that now. There will also be a link to the recording within LinkedIn. So please reach out, please go into LinkedIn, please find TSM. We're posting lots of information, lots of useful information on there in relation to the sessions we're running and also other information. So yes, please don't forget our customer day. So we've got a customer day on the 24th of October. We'd really love it if you could all join us. If you can please register so we know you're going to be attending, that would be fantastic. Thank you. And I thank you all for your time today. I hope you found it useful.
Thank you, Christina.